I'm joined on the set by our international affairs commentator, Doug Herbert. Doug, this refugee camp has long been a flashpoint for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it also underscores the devastation that we have seen in Gaza since the war began.
Yeah, it's long been a flashpoint because it really is the epicenter of where the first Intifada, the first Palestinian uprising, really began. Way back when, in December 1987, it was also the place where a UN school that had been housing Palestinian civilians was struck back during the 50-day Israel-Hamas war in 2014. So this is a place that has been an epicenter for tragedy in past Israeli-Palestinian conflicts, and the latest example thereof. Look, for a lot of the world looking on right now, what are they seeing? Israel says it was going after a senior Hamas commander that it reportedly killed, along with some other fighters, Hamas fighters, around him in this camp or in the tunnels under the camp that Israel says are under the camp. For a lot of people looking on, it's sort of like you're going after a needle in a haystack. You blow up the entire haystack in order to get the needle. This is a densely packed. I know that sounds, sort of a cliched thing to say. It's a very crowded, the most crowded refugee camp in Gaza, the largest one as well, even though it's not physically large surface-wise. It's because it is so dense. It's about 1.5 kilometers, square kilometer. But look, it also underscores for people watching this right now, a lot of the world looking on, it underscores the fear that as Israel has been stepping up its bombing campaign, as it now steps up its ground incursions into Gaza, the toll on Palestinian civilians is going to grow and is going to escalate. And this touches the raw nerve of everyone's worst fears about what they see as indiscriminate bombings and the disproportionate response by Israel from much of the international community. What you're seeing on the screen, I know it's difficult to see. It's very hard to distinguish some of those colors, but we have to work with what we have. This is an analysis based on satellite images that was published by the New York Times of the northern part of Gaza, showing, as you can see, really Gaza City. So it's north of that evacuation boundary line of the Wadi Gaza line. And what you see is in the orange are the areas that since October 7th, since the Hamas attacks, have suffered buildings that have suffered partial or total destruction, the earliest damage in this so-called war that started on October 7th. Those red areas, and I'm not sure how well you can distinguish them, but you see them around Jabalia, you see them throughout Gaza City, concentrated. Those little red splotches are more recent. They are since October 25th. And what are they really showing? The numbers aren't there, but you could see it visually. It's that a quarter, by some estimates, the New York Times estimates, about a quarter of the buildings in Gaza Gaza have been destroyed throughout this the Israeli airstrikes and bombing campaign. And you've had tens of thousands of buildings, according to some researchers who've looked at these images, cited by the New York Times, anywhere from 38,000 to over 44,000 buildings that have been partially or fully destroyed. So when we talk about that, really brings home in numbers when we talk about the toll on infrastructure and on Palestinian civilians living in those buildings, those hospitals, those schools. It brings home just how vast that devastation has been so far. And let's remember, this is seemingly just the beginning right now of what is going to be a much wider, broader campaign to come.
And we are talking a lot about Gaza at the moment, but there's also been more and more violence in the West Bank.
The West Bank, we are not talking enough about the West Bank. The West Bank has been extremely difficult for Palestinian residents to live in, even in the best of times. You have a lot of Israeli raids in the past year, raids that they say are counterterrorism operations targeting terrorist militants. The Palestinians say they've been indiscriminate, awful, happening in the middle of the night. These have all stepped up. You have seen heightening tension and heightening violence. Violence on the part of both, as the Palestinians would have it, from Israeli military that have been, they say, going after at least 120 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank in these types of raids, and even settler attacks since the beginning of, since the Hamas attacks on October 7th. And that brings in the other element. In addition to Israeli military raids and Israeli closures of entire checkpoints and cities and roads, which prevent Palestinians within the West Bank from, say, traveling from Nablus, from Jenin to Ramallah. If they have family there, they simply can't do it. They can't get in a car and drive there. You also have armed Jewish settlers in these expanded settlements that are like Swiss cheese throughout the West Bank, basically violence increasing among them. They are going after Palestinians. Palestinians will tell you they are stopping them from being able to work in their fields, from picking olives from their olive trees, from being able to go about their daily lives. A lot of Palestinians in the West Bank now are living in a state that even before these attacks, they were already in always a vigilant state of anxiety. Now, since October 7th, it's been a state often of fear. Fear of going outside their houses, fear of traveling any distance. If you live in Ramallah, which is sort of the putative capital of the West Bank for the Palestinians, if you live there, you're not going to stray too far from Ramallah right now. You're going to basically stay in your home. Families are divided. Commerce is basically either paralyzed or mostly shut down because you can't really transport goods across road networks that are closed. The maps always are changing, but at the crux of the problem is that the West Bank is important here, Jeannie. It's not just sort of a sidebar to the main Gaza story. It's important because if you're ever to have a viable Palestinian state, as Joe Biden keeps referring to, alongside an Israeli state, it would have to start in that West Bank area. And so far, that is not going to happen because you have all of these settlements which are preventing any sort of cohesiveness in Palestinian lands. And right now there seems to be no understanding or solution in the offing, no peace process to speak of.